Your Royal Highness Crown Prince Haakon, Minister Isaksen, Laureates Professor Greenblatt, Associated Professor Bogojevic, distinguished guests, friends of the Holberg Prize. It is a true pleasure for me to welcome you all to this year's award ceremony to celebrate Nils Klim Prize and the Holberg Prize. Today is obviously, above all, the celebration of this year's prize winners, the laureates, but also to celebrate the academic disciplines of the arts and humanities, social sciences, law and theology. When the Norwegian Parliament established the Ludvig Holberg Memorial Fund in 2003, the goal was to elevate the status of these academic disciplines. And since then, it has been the privilege for our university to be associated with this widely recognized prize. After the first laureates were awarded the prize in 2004, there have been a great number of outstanding scholars that have been selected for the prize, and this year's winners are no exception. The awards and the laureates have sparked national as well as international debate and attention, which in turn has led to increased awareness of the importance of these academic fields. This year's Holberg Prize winner has said that his lifelong project is to study literature in a historical, cultural and, in the broadest sense, a political context. Through his most read work, Will in the World, How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare, and the funding of the new historicism as an analytic tool and method, he has opened new ways of understanding Shakespeare. His scholarship gives us a renewed understanding of the relationship between arts and history, an understanding we can use to understand our time and the world. Minister Isaksen has announced a governmental report on the importance of the humanities and invited academics, institutions widely to contribute to this report. Why such a governmental report, some have asked? Well, I believe, and particularly on a day like this, when we truly see the value of the humanities, the Minister's initiative provides us with an opportunity to demonstrate the value and importance of the humanities to the Norwegian Parliament, to the politicians, but also to the society at large. In an era of grand societal, but definitely also highly complex challenges, we need the humanities to play a greater role and even to take a leading position. The Nils Klim Prize, named after one of the characters in the Holberg's science fiction novel Nils Klim's Underground Travel, is awarded to a young and outstanding scholar from the Nordic countries. And together, the Nils Klim Prize and the initiative at the Bergen Cathedral School earlier today point to the future and to the importance of these academic disciplines for generations to come. The University Aula, the venue for this year's event, was inaugurated only a year ago, but has since then hosted a large number of events, amongst those the Crown Prince's own conference. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to this beautiful University Aula and this year's award ceremony celebrating the laureates of the Nils Klim Prize and the Holberg Prize.
Your Royal Highness, Minister, laureates, guests and friends from Norway and abroad. The Holberg Prize was established by the Norwegian Parliament in 2003. The prize is administered by the University of Bergen on behalf of the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research. The university has appointed a board for the Holberg Prize. Every year, the Holberg Prize awards 2 prizes within the academic fields of the arts and humanities, social sciences, law and theology, the main Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize. The prizes are intended to raise the status of the fields covered by the prizes and to increase society's awareness of the importance of research in these fields. The prizes are awarded by the board on behalf of the University of Bergen and on the recommendation of academic committees which consist of outstanding scholars in the relevant academic fields. The Nils Klim Prize is awarded annually to a young Nordic researcher in arts and humanities, social sciences, law, or theology. The laureate must be under 35 years of age on the final date for nominations. The prize is awarded to researchers who have made outstanding contributions either within one discipline or through interdisciplinary work. The independence and innovativeness of the researcher's work is particularly important. It is also considered whether the research contribution is especially outstanding or promising in light of the researcher's age, the nature of the research project, and the research traditions in the researcher's academic field. The prize is worth 250,000 Norwegian kroner, approximately 27,000 euros, and 30,300 US dollars. On behalf of the University of Bergen and on the recommendation of the Nils Klim Prize Academic Committee, the board of the Holberg Prize has decided that this year's Nils Klim Prize goes to Dr. Sanja Bogojević. Sanja Bogojević, born 1982, is a Swedish scholar within the field of law. She was educated at King's College London, Universitet Passau, College of Europe, and Oxford University, where she completed her doctoral studies in 2011. She then joined Lund University as an associate professor of environmental law. She is the director of graduate studies and the co-director of the master's program in European business law. Bogojevic has been a visiting scholar at the Max Planck Institute in Bonn, New York University, University of New South Wales in Sydney, and University of California at Berkeley. In September this year, she will join Lady Margaret Hall and the Faculty of Law at the University of Oxford as an associate professor. The Nils Klim Academic Committee points out that Sanja Bogojević has used her strong European academic background to forge her original take on a central problem in European Union environmental law, focusing on emissions trade. According to Bogojevic, emissions trade may be conceptualized using 3 different coherent models. This is in itself a contribution, since she has constructed these models on the basis of a thorough discourse analysis of the scholarship on emissions trade. Discourse analysis is also used to flesh out the consequences of these conflicting models for the European Community rules and policies on this environmental issue. The resulting book, Emissions Trading Schemes, Markets, States and Law, from 2013, constitutes an outstanding contribution to the study of law and has been characterized by colleagues in legal studies as both original and an important first step in applying discourse analysis to unquestioned assumptions underlying legal scholarship. Furthermore, the problem of emissions trade is an issue of the highest societal relevance. The academic committee is impressed by the originality, the creativity, the prolific output, and the many scholarly interventions that research of Sanja Bogojević has led to. The committee is sure that the Nils Klim Prize will serve as a great incentive to break new grounds in legal studies. Let me then ask the Minister of Education and Research, Torbjørn Isaksen, to present this year's Nils Klim Prize to Dr. Sanja Bogojević.
Your Royal Highness, Crown Prince Haakon, Minister, the Holberg Board, Nils Klim Committee, family, friends, ladies and gentlemen. They did advise me to have a tissue up here, which I didn't follow, so you will have to work with my trembling voice instead. It's obviously a tremendous honor to stand before you here today and to be bestowed the Nils Klim Prize for my scholarship. Ludwig Holberg, whom we are celebrating today, was a writer, philosopher, theologian, historian, and self-taught lawyer. The latter profession I share with him, though I acquired it through academic studies. Holberg made significant contributions to natural law and laid a foundation for international law as an academic study in Denmark, Norway. My work concerns environmental law, a subject that did not exist in Holberg's time. Yet reading about Nils Klim's adventures, we quickly discovered the centrality of nature in Holberg's thought, not only as a theme, but as a metaphor. For instance, he uses a subterranean setting to voice a satirical societal commentary. Indeed, the examination of nature and its state gives us an allegorical mirror reflecting our society's values. Climate change, biodiversity loss, resource depletion are but a few examples of the state of the environment today. Law is often promoted as a tool for preventing such environmental degradation. But what role, more accurately, does law play with our interaction with nature? What my work shows is the legal interventions are rarely, if ever, straightforward. The question of why environmental degradation occurs can be answered in a number of ways, with reference to market failure, the problem of collective action, the lack of property rights, or legal coercion. What is important to note here is that each of these answers prescribes a specific construction of environmental regimes. In brief, what my work demonstrates is the law is always embedded in a particular narrative, so that individual laws are dependent on their context for meaning. In pursuing this research, I'm thankful to my absolutely loving parents, family, and friends who are here today for the support. Also, the many research institutions that provided the framework necessary for cultivating and stimulating intellectual environments owe special mention. Here I give thanks to Oxford University and my current institutional hub, the law faculty at Lund University. I give particular thanks to Mia Rønneberg, our dean, and Xavier Grousseau, our vice dean in Lund, for their relentless encouragement. In celebrating Holberg today, however, we celebrate not only his scholarship, but also his teaching. He held teaching positions in metaphysics, and he later became a professor in rhetoric, Latin, and history. In his spirit, I wish to take this opportunity to thank the many teachers who have shaped my academic path. To start at the beginning, I'm grateful to Lena Wolf, a Norwegian in fact, and my teacher in the first grade. She made a school a place where everyone belonged, which was especially significant for me, having at the time moved with my family from Serbia to Sweden. Shona Douglas Scott, who marked the first essay I wrote as an undergraduate in law, was also the first to remark and encourage early signs of my inclination for research. For that, I remain thankful. My interest in environmental law I owe to two people. One is Maria Lee, who introduced me to the subject. Particularly influential were the chapters Maria gave us from her upcoming manuscript on EU environmental law, These, at the time, still unpublished Word files made the writing process, and indeed academic life, suddenly appear not only real and personal, but above all, accessible. The other is Liz Fisher, my mentor, colleague, and friend, who taught me that scholarship, as all things treasured in life, demands utmost frankness. On this note, I humbly thank the Nils Klim Committee for awarding me this honorable prize, and in doing so, rewarding also a small army of inspiring and supporting teachers without whom I wouldn't be here today. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, Minister, laureates, guests, and friends. The Holberg Prize is awarded annually to scholars who have made outstanding contributions to research in the arts and humanities, social science, law, or theology, either within one discipline or through interdisciplinary work. The laureate must have had a decisive influence on international research. The prize is worth 4.5 million Norwegian kroner, approximately 486,000 euros, or $544,000 US. On behalf of the University of Bergen, and on the recommendation of the Holberg Committee, the board of the Holberg Prize has decided that this year's Holberg Prize goes to Professor Stephen Greenblatt. Stephen Greenblatt, born 1943, is an American scholar, theorist, literary critic, and Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Greenblatt was educated at Yale University, where he received his PhD in 1969. He then joined the University of California at Berkeley, where he became class of 1932 professor. Greenblatt came to Harvard University in 1997 as Harry Levine Professor of Literature. In 2000, he was named John Cogan University Professor of the Humanities at the same university where he still works. Stephen Greenblatt is a permanent fellow of the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin, and he has been a visiting professor at several universities in different countries, including France, Italy, Japan, UK, and China. The Holberg Committee points out that Stephen Greenblatt has been one of the most distinctive and influential voices in the humanities for 4 decades. His work has had immeasurable impact on the practices of history, literary studies, and cultural criticism, well beyond his own specialist area. He has provided us a vocabulary through which we can approach the task of understanding our times and its history. His work has been animated by the idea of life as art, and art as revealing something important about life. He has fashioned new methods by which the relationship between the word and the world, the text and the context, can be understood. Greenblatt is one of the most important Shakespeare scholars of his generation. In a remarkable series of books from Shakespearean Negotiations, 1988, to Hamlet in Purgatory, 2001, he has enriched our reading of the plays by showing how the texts both speak of themselves and to their contexts. For instance, his reading of Hamlet makes a subtle argument about the shifts after the Reformation in the ways in which people could speak to and negotiate with the dead. Shakespeare translated the massive disruptions of his age into art for a popular audience. He is also a preeminent scholar of the Renaissance. Renaissance self-fashioning 1980 is a powerful study of the ways in which structures that govern the generation of identities change. In its title, it introduces what has become one of the key concepts of modern social and cultural theory, self-fashioning. This concept illuminated the distinctiveness of the Renaissance as a historical period. It also generated productive insights into the construction of public and personal identities more widely, and became consolidated into a general movement known as New Historicism, which radically transformed the practices of humanities. Greenblatt energized new thinking about the relationship between the aesthetic and the historical. His claim that the aesthetic was not a separate realm, but intensified our experience of the real, was vigorously debated at the time across a range of disciplines and still sets the terms of debate today. His dozen books and numerous papers have cemented his reputation as a scholar and an intellectual, both within and outside the academy. One of his most impressive achievements has been to combine the practice of exacting scholarship with an ability to communicate with wider audiences. Recent contributions such as Will in the World 2004 and The Swerve 2011 have demonstrated to a large readership the value and excitement of humanities research. To quote his own words in Learning to Curse 1990, Greenblatt was drawn to the study of literature because it was, I quote, the encounter with something that I could not stand not understanding, that I could not quite finish with or finish off, that I had to get out of my inner life where it had taken hold, that I could retell and contemplate and struggle with, end of quote. In that struggle, Stephen Greenblatt has brought life to literature and literature to life in an unprecedented way. Let me ask His Royal Highness Crown Prince Haakon to present this year's Holberg Prize to Professor Stephen Greenblatt.
Your Royal Highness, Crown Prince Haakon, Minister Isaksen, representatives of the Holberg Committee, my beloved wife, Rami, dear colleagues, dear friends, and esteemed guests, I'm profoundly grateful to those who've chosen me to be the 2016 Holberg Laureate. My gratitude is personal, of course, but it extends beyond the sphere of my own life and work. In honoring me so splendidly, I should say so lavishly, you have by implication chosen to honor scholarship in the humanities. And you've done so at a moment in which the value of this scholarship sorely needs public recognition. For over the last few years, collective confidence in the significance of the humanities has sharply declined, along with the belief in the worth of a liberal arts education. Despite the absorbing interest of the subject and the ample statistical evidence that studying the humanities is a valuable preparation for a wide range of professions, many students and their parents have evidently concluded that it's a perilous waste of time and money. The causes are largely linked to developments in the economy and in technology, but this decline has come, in my view, just at the time in which we most need the analytical tools and the humane perspective offered by literary study, by art, by philosophy. Our culture processes information visually as never before in human history, through charts, graphs, photographs, movies, digital images, and innumerable other means. Those of you who were here yesterday to hear one of the talks at the Holberg seminar that showed images now being produced of, for example, brain scans will know exactly what I'm talking about. Is it possible that anyone could think that understanding how images work, how they're made, how they're produced, how they're processed, is not an essential discipline? Likewise, we consume fictions constantly. According to the US Labor Department's Time Use Survey, Americans watch television for an average of almost 3 hours per day. Other surveys suggest even higher numbers. If we add to these hours much of what passes fraudulently in the newspapers as news, along with music, lyrics, articles in popular magazines and websites, advertisements, religious fables, the occasional novel or play, daydreams, and I'm sorry to say most of what is said by politicians, we grasp that a startling amount of the day is spent producing and consuming fantasies. Is it possible that anyone could think that understanding how fictions work is not crucially important and valuable? Yet the course enrollment figures, in my country at least, are not lying. The decline is real. I have lunch with a gifted colleague who runs an important stem cell laboratory. He tells me that his team is working feverishly to locate the cells that in combination generate high intelligence, so that someday soon these can be selected and enhanced in our population. The Chinese, he remarks darkly, are already way ahead of us in this area of research. I want to plead with him to call a halt and go back to fundamental reflections on the nature of human life, reflections that from Plato and Dante to Kierkegaard and Hannah Arendt have shaped the project of the humanities. At the same time, I fear that the assumptions on which this whole project of the humanities was based have themselves eroded. I sit on the subway and look at the people around me, all staring at their devices. I see people doing the same thing even at football games or at the opera or in the middle of dinner at a restaurant. For that matter, I feel the urge in myself, the strange addiction most of us now share. And I wonder what has happened to us. I spent a summer once many years ago in a small village near Narbonne in the south of France. In the warm evenings, most of the village's inhabitants sat on the steps of their houses or on chairs in the streets. There were almost no cars back then in that quiet corner of the world, and chatted with their neighbors, exchanging stories along with glasses of homemade pastis. A very few people had purchased televisions, which were a new arrival in that provincial place and time. And these villagers, they were the only ones who sat inside, their doors closed, the spectral light flickering through the windows. I remember registering the loss, but of course it was only the advanced guard. Now we are all sitting inside, by ourselves, even when we're outdoors. In public spaces, some mobile phone users talk in loud voices about remarkably intimate matters, as if they had lost all sense of the people around them, or as if they imagined that everyone was similarly cocooned. Many of my students walk around with earbuds in their ears and their eyes on little screens. Their isolation from the human and natural environment is almost complete. They may, for all I know, be watching and listening to something agreeable, but it's unnerving all the same. For humans no longer seem to be using their devices, the devices seem to be using them, and in the process dividing us into hermetically sealed units. Though our technology depends upon fantastically complex electronic networks, it has the odd effect, not always, but alarmingly often, of undoing the human involvement with one another that subtended, that was envisaged by the humanities, the involvement John Donne so perfectly, so famously articulated in his devotions. No man is an island unto himself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. When I fell in love with Shakespeare a long time ago, it was because his works made me feel closer to those around me and to people I did not know. Through him, the world was opening up for me, as it had when, as a small child, I turned the pages of an old travel book that my parents happened to have in our house. But it was not places, the fjords, the Golden Gate Bridge, or even London, that opened for me through Shakespeare. I felt that I was entering human landscapes to which I could otherwise have no access. Those landscapes included battle-scarred Roman generals, medieval kings who believed that God would fight on their behalf, Renaissance princes maneuvering to seize power, and so forth. But what mattered still more was access to quiet, inward spaces, spaces whose existence I intuited but lacked words to articulate. The feeling of a love so intense that it obliterates every other object. A secret fear of impotence and failure. The surging up of a murderous or suicidal impulse. A sense of estrangement from the world. What should such fellows as I do crawling between earth and heaven? Shakespeare seemed to be offering me not simply a heightened closeness to people I did not know. It was greater proximity to parts of myself that lay hidden in the darkness. And it was precisely access to those parts of myself in the present that paradoxically excited my interest in the past. I have never lost my first overpowering experience of wonder, my own primal scene. They already thought that, and felt that, and did that back then? How is it possible that the long dead, even from that distant time and place, are speaking so directly to me? It was with this sense of wonder, encouraged by a gifted high school teacher named John Harris, that I embarked on my undergraduate studies as an English major. As I soon learned, the English department at Yale in the early 1960s was the greatest proponent of the school of formalist literary interpretation called New Criticism. An interest in historical context was actively discouraged by many of my most gifted teachers, and there were many remarkably gifted ones, who treated such an interest as a vulgar, vaguely middle-brow distraction. What mattered was to chart with growing sophistication the internal structure of complex works of art, whether a 14-line sonnet or a sprawling 18th century novel. How were the patterns of imagery established and developed by Andrew Marvell? In how many ways did Pope's Dunciad parody Homeric motifs? If I wanted to know whom Pope was skewering, I could look at the footnotes if I wanted, but the information I might find there would not be relevant, nor would the apparent justice or injustice of the attacks. Judging a poem, wrote Yale's William Wimsatt, quote, is like judging a pudding or a machine. One demands that it work, end quote. This position, clear, simple, and elegant, had triumphed at post-war Yale and in other university departments of literature, and for very good reasons. It swept away generations of woolly biographical musing, often absurdly sentimental and moralizing. It dismissed displays of inherited taste, courtly manners, or a presumed rootedness in blood and nation. It offered instead a valuable, highly adaptable, democratic toolkit of interpretive techniques that did not depend upon contextual knowledge. For 3 years, I undertook the rigorous training that formalism demanded. I learned at least some of the ways that my gifted teachers employed to judge puddings and machines. And I learned what to leave out. My senior thesis as an undergraduate on Huxley, Waugh, and Orwell attempted to describe the structure of modern satire. that Huxley was on the extreme right and Orwell on the left, or that was on the extreme right and Orwell on the left, or that Huxley lived after 1937 in Los Angeles and in Taos, where he experimented with mescaline and LSD, simply didn't matter. Though I had bouts of impatience with what I was taught, I was and remain deeply grateful for it. One of my failures as a teacher, one that I share with at least others of my generation, has been an inability or an unwillingness to hand over the whole handsome toolkit, burnished and enhanced, to my own students. By the mid-1960s, I was pulling in a very different direction. I had gone on a fellowship to Cambridge, which was the first time I left the United States, and I was filled with excitement at the novelty of it all. To be sure, in my studies at Cambridge, I found considerable continuity with what I had been learning, for a key figure in fashioning American New Criticism had been the Cambridge literary scholar I.A. Richards, whose pedagogical theories, though under challenge, still dominated his own English institution. I understood very little about the philosophical debates that Richards's celebrated books on literary criticism had generated. I confess to you, I hadn't read those books. But I was immediately initiated into one of its practical results, an obsession with dating games. These were not, I hasten to say, what we now mean by the term dating games. They were exercises in close reading, and they took the form of tutorials of giving students a brief, unidentified passage in poetry or prose, usually drawn from either a minor writer whom no one could expect to have encountered, or from a very obscure work by a major writer. The student's task was simply to date the excerpt as accurately as possible and to explain the basis for the dating. The people who were good at this game, and there were people who were amazingly good at it, could almost infallibly come up with the right answer. Not merely the latter half of the 17th century, say, but the 1680s, or even 1686 to 1687. We were given no explanation why this exercise was useful, and no encouragement to venture from it to the world that lay outside the radically decontextualized, isolated snippets. It had the genuine virtue of encouraging a restless, wide-ranging reading across the centuries, reading that swooped down to seize upon minute telltale signs of particular moments in time. But as the weeks went by, I began to feel at once lost and claustrophobic. Relief was promised in a different set of tutorials conducted by a young Renaissance scholar, he's now a knighted eminence, who undertook to prepare me for the Cambridge examination paper called simply 1579 to 1603. Here at last, I was to settle down in a single historical period, the age of Spencer, Marlowe, and Shakespeare. But I was in for a surprise. The tutor began by assigning me a very large reading from something called Batman upon Bartholomew, his book. I still remember the title with a shudder. This was, as I now better understand, a 1582 revision undertaken by the learned Doctor of Divinity Stephen Batman of a 14th century translation by the Cornish scholar John of Trevisa of a vast encyclopedia compiled in the year 1240 by the Franciscan scholastic Bartholomeus Anglicus, Bartholomew the Englishman. Fighting off sleep, I struggled to get through the pages of the Order of the Seraphim, of the virtues vital, animal, and visible, of the four qualities elementary, and so forth. And I showed up at the tutorial without the paper that I was meant to have written. I confess that I could make very little sense of what I had read. My tutor looked darkly at me, and in dismissing me, his only response was, as they say in blackjack, to double down. For the next week's assignment, he stayed with the same book, only greatly increasing the number of pages I had to read, and about which I was supposed to write something. I grimly worked through Batman's version of Trevisa's version of Bartholomew's account of the properties of spittle, the remedies for the headache, the disease of the nostrils, the nature of the crystalline heavens, and so forth. When I returned, I had at least written pages in which I tried to explain why this work was so disheartening to me. I could find no points of entry, I said, no moments in which some sympathetic chord was struck, no sound of a voice speaking to me. I still remember the harumphing response. It is not about you, Greenblatt. Looking back across these many years, I grasp more clearly now what my tutor was trying to do, and up to a point I even approve. The past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. He wanted me to experience radical alterity, the steadfast otherness of a world that resists easy appropriation. But what I actually experienced was a sterile antiquarianism, a past that had nothing to offer me, a literary knowledge that was not merely alien but dead. If I were sufficiently diligent, I could lay claim to this knowledge for myself and go on to bully the next generation of students. Not a consummation devoutly to be wished, not in the mid-1960s, when the windows were being thrown wide open and all structures of authority were being called into question. I was increasingly caught up in the politics of my day, but I had no wish to abandon the study of literature. I wanted to understand why Sir Walter Raleigh, courtier, monopolist, ruthless adventurer, and restless schemer, wrote such beautiful, sensitive love poetry. I described the strange metamorphosis of Thomas More's radical vision of a communist utopia into a prison camp. I struggled to know why, while most of their contemporaries shrugged, some men and women in the 16th century sacrificed their lives for obscure points of theology. Avidly reading the literature of travel and exploration, I brought to bear what I learned on Shakespeare's Henry IV plays, or Othello and The Tempest. I reflected with wonder on the ways in which certain remarkable Renaissance individuals contrived to fashion their identities as if they were artifacts and clung under immense pressure to a sense of autonomous agency. These investigations into the past were not attempts to escape from my present. On the contrary, I felt I could use them to focus and clarify my own contemporary preoccupations. But the voices of the dead would never allow themselves only to speak to the here and now. They insisted on their own urgent desires and fears. For better or worse, provided I sensed a point of entry, some intimation of intimacy, I've always been pulled head over heels into their other world. Columbus's first exclamation of wonder in the New World, a dinner party with Cardinal Wolsey, a clandestine exorcism in Buckinghamshire, Frobisher's kidnapping of the natives of Baffin Island, the cruel punishment of a thief in 17th century Java, a secret performance of King Lear at the house of recusant Catholics in the north of England. Such moments were enough to set me off on searches, sometimes for years on end, and most often finding their way back to Shakespeare. Mourning for my father and brooding about his desire for post-mortem prayers, I began to think about ghosts, which drew me into a fascination with the lost Catholic realm of purgatory, which turned into a book about Hamlet, which somehow accomplished my own work of mourning. To grapple with my own world, I had to grapple with a world that was not mine. But I could only do so if I could bring myself along. Otherwise, there were only lifeless words on the page, identifiable through subtle markers as dating, say, from the early 17th century, perhaps 1602 or 1603, but otherwise mute. It took me quite a few years to figure out the balance, and even now I'm far from certain. But the goal is always to grapple with whatever comes to us from the past, in its strangeness, in its opacity, and at the same time to engage with our own most pressing concerns, whether they're shouted in the public square or whispered in the quiet of our hearts. The task is often surprisingly difficult. I can demonstrate the ways in which Shakespeare was a person of his time and can show you the ways in which his work reflects the period's imperialism and the murderous conflict between Catholics and Protestants and the spectacles of power in the Elizabethan state. With enough time, I might even be able to discover all he drew from Batman upon Bartholomew, his book. I can demonstrate as well the ways in which Shakespeare is a person of our own time. I can show you how powerfully he reflects on gender confusion, on the unconscionable gap between rich and poor, on racial hatred, on the possibility of a blustering, morally bankrupt demagogue actually becoming a great nation's leader. But how to explain that he's both of these things at once? That's the challenge that still, after all these years, tantalizes and eludes and excites me. That the Holberg Committee has conferred upon the effort to meet this challenge so magnificent an honor is far beyond anything that I expected or indeed deserved. But I accept it on this memorable afternoon, not from myself alone, but for all the remarkable teachers and students, colleagues, and dear friends, some of whom are here with us today, with whom I've shared the attempt to fathom the magical power of human creativity. Thank you very, very much.